There are a lot of crazy monsters in the Ukraine, and I'm not talking about any gentleman whose name starts with a V or any ghosts of Kiev. No, there are some truly terrifying beasts that walk the lands of Slavic countries. So, why don't we have a bit of a story, friends? Grab a seat, grab a drink, and I've got one for you. Some of my favourite monsters have made their way into your favourite television shows and video games, so let's start off with my favourite Slavic monsters from The Witcher. Starting with the Kikimora. The Kikimora is a monstrous, long-limbed, gnashed-toothed, sharp-clawed creature, quick as the devil and deadly as all hell. But it might surprise you to find that that is not the Kikimora from Slavic mythology. No, the Kikimora from Slavic mythology comes in two varieties. They are the wives of other creatures slash monsters of Slavic territories. The first one, and they both appear basically the same, they both have long bird-like limbs, they have gangled stick-like bodies with foliage growing from their neck bones, sticks and twigs growing out of their necks, and a bird-like or mouse-like face depending on where you're hearing the story. Now, both Kikimora do essentially the same thing, they invade homes, but depending on whose wife we're talking about depends on exactly how they invade the home. The first one is the wife of the Domovoi. The Domovoi is a sort of bearish character. He's got a lot of body hair and he wears a big fur coat, and he brings like good tidings. He keeps homes warm and he keeps them protected, and yeah, sort of just he's a big teddy bear that's absolutely horrifying looking. I'll put up a picture here. And his wife hides behind the stove and makes your food cold. A far cry from this, yeah? Definitely not the same creature that we're talking about, but makes your food cold and makes the sound of a mouse hiding beneath or behind a stove or behind the dishes, and squeaks like a mouse to annoy you, and that is the complete and whole purpose of this creature. However, her counterpart, which is the wife of a creature we're going to talk about next, chews that not steals, it's not like a magical I spirited away, chews the toes and fingers off of children that have been bad. Now, I'm not sure which one is worse, this horrifying creature from The Witcher or the creature that looks like a sticky bird that lives underneath your bed and chews off the fingers if you don't listen to your mum. But I guess I'll leave it up to you to decide down in the cute section below. The Leshy. Now, I bring this one up because it also appears somewhat in the Witcher series. If you've read the books, it appears more prominently there. But a Leshy, better known as a Lesnik, he is a forest creature of sorts. Depending on the area where this story is told, it varies significantly. But the general understanding of this creature is that he is a guardian of the forest. Tall and green-skinned, wearing a sort of grass skirt with blue cheeks and very long white hair. It is said that he could be as small as the tallest blade of grass or as tall as the tip of the top trees, and his whole and complete deal is that he defends the forest and the creatures that exist within. Now, this is also a far cry from the creature we see in other folklore. In The Witcher, he sort of comes off as somewhere between a vampire and a zombie, and in D&D, the Leshy sort of looks like a Kernunos sort of clone with horns and with the face hidden and sort of human-esque, not as uncanny valley as the other creatures that we would see in folklore, but more sort of like cult-esque. But out of all of the creatures on this list, this creature is the one that terrifies me the most. Now, farmers would often give offerings to the Leshy in the same way that Celtic and Nordic groups would offer sacrifices to Kernunos and the Horned God. The Slavs would present offerings so that their farms would be protected and prosperous. However, it is said that if someone were to disrespect the forest or to injure something that was under the protection of the Leshy would lure them deep into the woods and then tickle them to death. Which, I know that doesn't sound scary objectively, but can you imagine this big green creature luringly seducing you away into the forest, and then it gets you alone, you're lost, you're cold, you're tired, you're terrified, and then he just goes, goo, and just starts tickling you until you die. What happens if you're not ticklish? This is the most terrifying creature in all of folklore, and I will not be challenged on it. Also, it said if two Leshies ever meet each other, they will literally destroy everything around them until one of them is dead. Alright, moving on to the Mora, the classic black witch archetype. It is said that the Mora is born from the blood of an infant girl. Now, there are a couple of different ways that this story is extrapolated on. Some say that it is an infant girl who has had her monthlies, meaning that as soon as she's born, she menstruates. But that is a less common telling of the story. More often, it is a witch born from the amniotic fluid mixed with the blood of an injured infant right after they are born. And it is that spawns this witch. She instantly matures. Now, sometimes in the stories it is the baby who becomes the witch. Other times the witch is like her shadow. It's all very fascinating, but what is consistent is that the Mora has long black hair that falls all the way past her ankles, and she is bound up and down from top to bottom in black bandages that sort of drip of necrotic stink, but she is not dead. They just drip of this bog-esque smell and fluid, and it was said that she would sneak into homes in the night and drink the breath from the mouths of infants and children and even men. And the way that she would get into the homes is she would transform into black hair, pure black hair and straw, and fiddle her way through the keyholes. And this is fascinating because if you know anything about witchcraft, there's a huge emphasis on the power of the hair in witchcraft, and this stems back to older druidic and R1-esque practices, and that's something that we can talk about in another video, but it is an absolutely fascinating and terrifying creature of the Slavic people. Now, before we go any further, I do want to point out that not all of these creatures are specific to the Ukraine. Some of them are Russian, some of them are from other places, but there are versions of these stories that are told all throughout Slavic countries, and I've just sort of picked my favorite ones. Alright, let's move on to another D&D favorite, the Rusalka. The Rusalka is one of the few creatures on this list who is depicted accurately across all forms of media, whether that be The Witcher or D&D. These creatures are a pale young woman who has blue or red hair, blue, green, red hair, something that is meant to mimic the colours of moss in a river and or lake. The green and red are the stereotypical forms of hair that are on her head, and she is incredibly pale, almost luminescent in the night, and she is incredibly aggressive towards human beings. And it is believed that the reason she is so aggressive towards people is because at some point she was drowned by a human being, and coming back she has decided to indiscriminately kill any who would come near her. Now, what's interesting is that she doesn't necessarily kill people in the way that you would expect these sorts of spirits to kill. No, normally she would laugh with a banshee-like wail, and her laughter would lead to madness and even to people pulling out their own eyes and scratching out their own eardrums so that they would no longer have to hear her melodious and grating tone of laughter. I know a couple of people like this, and I worry that I might actually be associated with some Rusalka, and if you have this same fear, a little bit of garlic extract and a little bit of wormwood will go a long way to keeping those people from laughing you to death. Let's move on to the first one. And my number one favourite monster from the Slavic countries is the German, sometimes called the German. It is literally just a spirit that controls the weather, and it was traditional in some Slavic countries to create clay dolls that mimicked the German, and break them during the summer solstice to hope for rains. And the whole and complete reason why I love this spirit is because it is one of my favourite jokes to believe that there are some people out there in the olden times of Slavic countries who their greatest fear was the Germans. Little did they know that that would probably become an actual issue at some point. But there were people who would literally make the German and then crush the German so that they could have rain. And that just tickles me pink. So, those are my favourite Slavic monsters, my friends. Thank you so much for joining me in the tavern. I bid thee to stay bloodthirsty, my friends. And remember, all hail the Black Dragons. See you in the next one.